A story is told about a little young girl, whose grandmother had just had a pacemaker. She was very worried about her grandmother, and so were her parents. But one day she came back from her Sunday school class and told her parents, "Grandma's going to be okay." And they asked her why. She said, "Well, because we learned today, blessed are the pacemaker." Well, you know, it's true, though. This is what Jesus is basically saying to us. Blessed are the peacemakers. And that's what we need to learn about. How to be the peacemakers. One of the things we must first learn is that Jesus did not say, "Blessed are those who have this peace." He said, blessed are those who make this peace. And there's a big difference between those two things, having that peace and making that peace. And as our choral anthem today said it so clearly, our hope is to be an instrument of God's peace. But before we can be an instrument of God's peace, we must first make that peace in our hearts. You cannot be someone who is making peace in this world until you have learned how to make peace in your own heart. So today, the focus of my message then is on these two questions that we must answer. One, how do we make this peace of God in our hearts? Because if we don't have it in our hearts, we certainly can't show it to the world in which we live. How do we make that peace in our hearts? And then I think even more importantly, the second question is this. Why should we ever believe that we have the ability to make peace in our heart? These are two very important questions. How can we do it, and what would give us the right to think we could do it? Well, those of you who've listened to my messages over the last 4 years, you know that I love to tell stories, and I love to tell them because they're like little parables of God. They're human stories, and they illustrate the points we need to learn if we are to truly understand the Scripture. And one of the things I love to do is to read biographies of famous people, because I think especially the lives of the famous people are really very clear parables that we can all think about because we know these people and we know who they are and we know what they've done. So today I plan upon sharing with you two such quick biographies of two famous people you may know, one more than the other perhaps. But the first one I would share with you today enables us to understand how to make this peace of God in our hearts. It's a story of a man who, in my opinion, probably knows more about how to make the peace of God in his heart than any person in our time that I have read of or know about. His name is Nick Walinda, and he is still living, of course. He's part of the family that is known as the Flying Walindas. Since the 1700s, his family has been performing tight wire performances, acrobatics, things of that nature. Dangerous things they have been doing since the 1700s. You may remember Nick as being the only man ever to walk across the Grand Canyon on a tightrope. A tight wire, actually. 4,000 feet across, with no net below, 3,000 foot drop, and winds of approximately 50 miles an hour. If anybody needed the peace of God, Nick Walinda needed it. Well, those of you who know him, and perhaps you've read his book, and I would highly recommend you read his book. It's called Balance. I think that would be a good name for a book. And he's a tremendous Christian witness. And let me tell you, one of the best I have read to talk about how he makes this peace of God in his heart. Before he goes out and walks across the Grand Canyon, or walks across Niagara Falls as he did, or walks across Times Square. before he does that, he makes this peace of God in his heart. But not only does he make it in his heart before he does these death-defying acts, he does it every day of his life before he leaves his house. He makes this peace of God in his heart. And he shares in his book how he does it, and I can't really think of a better way to describe how one actually becomes a peacemaker, making peace of God in your heart so that you are ready to go into the world in which we live. He says basically there's a lot of things that he goes through, but the three most important things are the things I think we should remember and put into practice in our lives today as well. The first thing is an intense focus on relating to God and only to God. I'm going to say that again. He builds that peace inside of himself by making sure that during his day he is, as he says it, praying without ceasing. He is constantly in communication, in relationship, constantly talking, visiting with, and being together with God. He does not think about much else besides that, except that intense focus upon being with God and conversing and relating to God. As an example, when I read this in his book, it was amazing. He talks about when he was walking across the Grand Canyon on that tightrope, about a third of the way over, the wind picked up to 57 miles an hour. His crew has a rule that if the wind ever goes over 50 miles an hour, cancel, abort, do not go forward. They radioed him to stop. But he was in such peace, such conversation with God over the joy of the balance he felt. He actually says he did not hear them radio. And he went on, of course, successfully all the way across the canyon. Because he was oblivious to the dangers that had now arisen. He was oblivious to the things that he was going to have to face with a wire that was straining this way and that way, and nothing but this long pole to hold his balance. But he felt that balance, and he never, ever paid any attention after that, because he had built that peace inside of him that focused only on conversing with God and being with God and listening to God and thinking only of what God and he were doing together. And that's one of the key things he does all day long, every day, to build that peace in his heart. He makes sure that that's the focus of his life. He makes sure that that conversation never ceases, that he never thinks of himself as being an individual, separate person in this world. He is with God, and that's how he finds this peace. An amazing thing that we also can have in our hearts as well, and build it like that by focusing intensely upon our conversation and our relationship with the living God in our lives. And then the second thing that he mentions is this: he has a continuous trust in the presence of God. It is his belief that God is never gone, that never not here. He is always in the presence of God, and he trusts that God is always in his presence, and that together they are in the presence of each other. And he builds that peace in his life by remembering that every day, every second, every hour, I am in the presence of God. God is in my presence. There's no separation between me and God. And he finds great, great peace in that. He says in his book that he never asks God to keep him on that tightrope. Never prays for that. Now me, I would pray for that. Keep me on that tightrope, man. I don't want to fall at all. But he never asks that of God. He asks nothing of God except that God's presence would not be taken from him, and he would not be taken from God's presence. And I love the way he says it in his book. He says, listen, if I fall, I'm still with God. If I make it to the other side, I'm still with God. One way or the other, I'm still with God. what peace that brings. Amen. No longer threatened by the things of life. You become oblivious to the horrible thoughts people say to you sometimes. You become oblivious to the ways that people disappoint you or hurt you. You become oblivious to all of the ways that you might have yourself upset about the life you're living. You become oblivious to all of that, and you're no longer worried about any of the things that you might once have been afraid of. And you might have thought, oh, this might take away my life. Oh, this might hurt me. Oh, this might be a great loss. None of that bothers you anymore, because you know you're always with God. Always with God. And you have nothing to worry about, because if you are always with God, then you are where you need to be and in the way you need to be. And so that's the second way he works on building up the peace in his life. He works on that relationship, focusing about talking to God, being with God. And then he focuses upon the fact that he is always present with God and never asks God to take away from himself something that is part of the reality he has to face. Because it's he and God facing it together. And together there is nothing that can defeat him or cause him harm. It's a great thought, and it's a thought we should think about every day of our own life. Do we really believe we walk and live in the presence of God, that he is never taken from us? And so therefore, what do we have to fear? What do we have to think could destroy us? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now, the third thing he says is one that really did shock me when I read it, because I've studied many self-help books and things of this nature, and there's a lot of commonalities in here. But this one was an amazing thought. He said that the other way that he builds the peace inside of himself, the other way he makes that peace stronger and stronger and stronger, is to always boldly accept the challenges of life. Always. He tells the story of how the executives of ABC Sports called him up one time and said, "Would you be willing to walk across the Grand Canyon on a tightrope without a net?" And his response was immediately, "Yes, I'll do it." Now, if they'd asked me, I would have said, "Well, let me think about that a little while." Even if I had his talent and faith, I would have said, "Let me think about that. I'll get back to you in a day or two." But not Nick. "Yes, I'll do it. I will do it right away." They were probably shocked because, walking across the Grand Canyon on a little wire with 50-mile-an-hour winds, that's something you need to think about. Can it even be done? He didn't even think about that. "Yes, I will do it." He boldly accepts the challenges and the threats of life because he believes that they are the things that give him the opportunity to show the peace that he has. Okay? That was a shock to me, because I can tell you, if I were standing up on a rope with nothing but a 10-foot pole and 3,000-foot drop, I wouldn't be thinking about, "Oh, this shows others how peaceful I am." I wouldn't be thinking that at all. But Nick understands a principle that I think is really tremendous for us to grasp. And that is that where are you going to show others your peace? You're not going to show others your peace when life is all nice and good, everything's going well, we're all happy, You're going to show others your peace when there's conflict. You're going to show others peace when there's difficulty, when there's reasons to be afraid. You're going to show others peace when there's challenges and threatening things to your life. That's the opportunity to show others your peace. That's the opportunity to inspire others to have the peace that they need. And he went on in his book to say that when he was walking across that Grand Canyon on that tightrope, he could literally feel the eyes of the millions and millions of people around the world watching him on TV. He could just feel those people looking at him. And they were watching him go across that rope to see if he had the courage and the peace and the calmness to do it. And he showed them that he did have that, and that came from God. And he's not embarrassed to say that to anybody, anywhere. And he said, as he was going across, he felt what Jesus must have felt when he was carrying that cross up the hill of Calvary. And people were watching him. Will he have the peace to be crucified? Will he have the peace to go through this? And yes, he did. And what does that do? It inspires the rest of us to hope and to pray and to wish that we can have that same kind of peace. And so, as Nick says, what it does is it just builds peace upon peace upon peace. Every time you show someone your peace, every time you show them how you can walk through the storm with God, it makes your peace stronger, and it encourages them to find that same kind of peace themselves. It is the greatest of all witnesses. And so he teaches us through his writings what Jesus was trying to make clear to us when he had that prayer in Gethsemane, and he said to God, take this cup away from me, but nonetheless, Father, your will be done. The understanding was, I will accept this crucifixion as a sign of your will in my life. So then, what does that mean? That means then, as we find ourselves in challenging situations with other people because of a relational problem, or we find ourselves in challenging places because of physical difficulties or realities that tend to crush us, when we find ourselves in that situation, what do? Do we shrink? Do we run away? Do we say, not me, I'm not walking across the Grand Canyon with a wire like that? No, we say, absolutely. I will face it because God is with me. God and I are talking, and through this God's glory will be made known. You see how that builds peace in your life, and it makes your peace stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's the biography of this wonderful person named Nick or Linda. I hope you get a chance to read his book. But the point I want to make today is that this is how we make this peace in our life. We make it by our intense focus upon our relationship with God. We make it by never forgetting we're always in the presence of God, and by never running away from the challenges that we face, because through them the peace is known to the world. So that answers the first question then. How do we make this peace so that we are a peacemaker? How do we do that? Well, I just described it. So now comes the more important question in some ways. Because a lot of people doubt that. They say, well, that might be good for Nick or Linda, and that might be good for Jesus, but it's not good for me. No, it is good for you. It is something you can do. I always try to tell people this. Jesus never would ask us to do anything if Jesus did not first believe we can do it. You see? Why would he say, blessed are the peacemakers, if none of us have a chance to ever be a peacemaker? Jesus believes we can do it. So I'll tell you this second story today about another famous person, which I think will help us to clarify what is necessary for us to understand about this issue of why we should believe we can be peacemakers. This is a story about a breech baby. A baby boy that was a breech baby, meaning that the birth was not easy. It was not coming out. And this was in the first part of the 20th century. And so when this baby was born, the only way they could get it out of its mother's womb in those days was to use these forceps. Put it around the head of the baby. Pull, pull, pull. Until at last the baby would be able to turn and come out like it was supposed to. Well, it was not a very sophisticated procedure in those days. And what happened when they did this was the baby was severely injured. The entire left side of his face was permanently scarred. His neck was scarred. His ear was crinkled. And worse, it totally perforated and destroyed the eardrum in his left ear. So here was this baby born, yes, but to have to live a life with a permanent scar on the neck, on the cheek, and to be deaf in one ear. It also made him very weak physically. It was difficult for him to eat because of the way the bones had been kind of crushed. So he was always kind of a skinny and frail boy, deaf in one ear. He had a hard time at school. The children teased him quite a bit. They called him Mr. Bones. Some of them called him Scarface. You know, children are nice like that. And so he didn't have much of a social life in his early school years. So all he could do was sit in his parents' bar. They owned a bar. And he would listen to the radio. He loved to listen to the music. And the longer he listened to the music, he began to realize that because he was deaf in one ear, music penetrated the other ear so much more clearly than words, people speaking. It was kind of difficult for him to make that out. Of course, he learned over time how to do that. But music was the thing that excited him because he could hear it so clearly. And he listened to all the singers on the radio. And one of his most perfect singers in his mind, the one that he was most in love with, was a man at that time known as Bing Crosby. And he listened to Bing Crosby and thought he was the greatest singer he had ever heard. He also liked Rudy Vallee. And so he started trying to mimic Bing Crosby especially. He even got a little pipe and a sailor hat. A little young skinny boy trying to do that. And he began to be pretty good at it and was able to actually begin to sound a little bit like Bing Crosby. And so he would go out on the street corners in front of his parents' bar and he would sing these songs that he had memorized that Bing Crosby sang. And people would walk by and thought he was cute and they'd drop pennies and nickels at his feet. And he was kind of excited about that. And he told his parents, he said, "This is the racket to get into. You can make money singing." But his parents were very disappointed. They had a greater plan in mind for their son than to be a singer. His father actually even said to him, "Son, you need to get a real job. Singing is for bums." Well, there was a little conflict there. But the older he got, the more he felt in his heart that he had the talent, that he had the abilities to sing. And of course, people would naysay and put him down and say, "Listen, man, you're deaf in one ear. Do you understand that? And you're skinny and you're not very handsome, actually. What makes you think you have a chance of a career in music anywhere? What makes you think of that?" And inside, he just felt like, I can be a singer. I can be somebody that the world will want to listen to. And so, after he graduated, well, actually, he did not graduate from high school. He left and decided to go to New York to pursue a career in music. And that's what he did, and he was singing here and there, trying to get on radio shows. But he was not having a lot of success. He had a decent voice, but it was nothing so special. Then one day, he ran into a voice coach that was fairly famous there in Manhattan in those days, who heard him actually singing in a bar for a few dollars. And when this voice coach heard him, he was really struck by this skinny young man. He said, "You know, when I listened to him, I was amazed at the range of his voice. From the lowest B flat to the highest B flat, without any effort in between. And what control he had over his volume, in and out, sweet, soft, loud, and perfect pitch. Never missed a note anywhere." So this voice coach said, "You know, I'd like to help you." So they got together, and the voice coach helped him to perfect the tools that he already had. And he was a quick study. And his voice really improved. His ability to sing really improved. He began to get contracts. He actually began to get records. This was right after World War II. And he began to be fairly famous in the United States. Many people said that After World War II, it was his voice that got America singing again. So this skinny, little, breech-born baby, deaf in one ear with a scar on his face, became the chairman of the board. Frank Sinatra. And I tell you that story because it's a parable. It's a parable. He became what he became because he believed he could be that, and then he used the God-given tools he had to become that which he was meant to be. If that's not a parable, I don't know what it is. But you see, the point of it is, we need to meet the great voice coach, whose name is Jesus. We need to meet that one who knows in our hearts what talents we have. We need to meet that one who knows that we have the ability to have faith. We have the ability to have hope. And we have the ability to love. We need to meet that coach who knows what our skills really are. None of the other creatures in this world have this ability to have faith and hope and love. But we do. And we are called to be peacemakers because we have these abilities. We have the ability to have faith in God's faith in us. God has told us how many times, I love you, I love you, I love you. You're the best thing I ever created. You are the most wonderful thing I have ever made. You are the apple of my eye. We have the ability to have faith in that. We can believe God when He says that. And we can begin to believe that about ourselves. And so therefore, there's no reason for us to go into any day in our life feeling threatened or guilty. No reason. We got the power of faith in our hearts. God is with us, not against us. And if we believe that, and if we cherish it, and if we grow it in our hearts, we will begin to make peace in our hearts because we have this faith in God's faith in us. And likewise, we have the ability to hope. Humanity has always hoped for something better. We've always hoped for a better life. We have always hoped that good will triumph over evil. We know what that feels like. And we know that we have the ability to hope. And God sees that in us and says, you know, you got the ability to hope, so let me tell you the truth. I am victorious over all evil. I am victorious over anything you might fear in this life. You see, we have the ability to have hope in that. And if we can have hope in that, then we can have peace in our hearts. Because all the evil being done to us, all the horrible things we see in the world, all the reasons to be afraid, do not affect our lives anymore. Because we have begun to live in that hope that God will be victorious. Faith, hope, and we have this great ability to love. Yes, and to love unconditionally. That's the ability we have. The problem is we just don't believe we have it. We just don't believe we have that ability. We let the world trick us into believing that we don't have that ability. But we do have that ability. And we have the ability to change what we believe. We can't change the world, no. We can't change people in the world, no. But we can change what we believe. And the point we need to change is to quit believing we can't love unconditionally and to start believing that we can love unconditionally. You know, relational problems are a big issue for most of us all the time. But the problem is we don't believe we can love unconditionally. We think we have to love quid pro quid. You see, we don't. No, not at all. We do not have to let other people rattle our chain. You don't have to do that. People let it happen all the time. Pull your chain, make you bark. You don't have to do that. You're free. Nobody says you've got to do that. And we don't have to be pulled down to their level. Argue, 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 argue. We don't have to do that. We are free not to do it. And therefore, we can love unconditionally above all of the self-interested conflicts of this world in which we live. So we got the talent, just like Frank Sinatra had the talent of the amazing perfect pitch and the volume and the range. We got